Hello and welcome to the tutorial for this finger knit Popper the Penguin. My name is Sabrina and I am the owner of Sab Stuffies, and I can't wait to share this pattern with you. This has been one of my most requested patterns to share, so I'm glad that the time is finally here to share it. This baby penguin has been my favorite stuffy to make so far out of all of my other stuffies, so I hope you enjoy this pattern as much as I do. Before starting the tutorial, I wanted to go over a few reminders. This pattern for Popper the Penguin is an intermediate level pattern, and since it is an intermediate level pattern, I'll be going through the more basic skills a little bit quicker, and then for the more intermediate level skills, I will be slowing down. I also want to remind you that this is a video tutorial, so at any point throughout the tutorial, you can pause, rewind, or slow down this video, and you can keep practicing each step until you get it down. Alright, so now I'm going to go over the supplies that you'll need to make this baby penguin or Popper the Penguin. You'll need a pair of scissors. You will need some yarn. The colors I use for this baby penguin are black, gray, white, and mustard. I get most of my yarn from Hobby Lobby. It's the Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss. This color is from Michaels. It's the Bernat Blanket Big in the color Vintage. And then these are the Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss from Hobby Lobby. This is mustard, light gray, and black. And then you will also need some polyfill. And that is it for the supplies. So let's go ahead and get started on this video tutorial. Here is a simple pattern guide. Feel free to pause the video if you would like to review it quickly before starting, or you can refer to the PDF download you received upon purchase that also has a simple pattern guide in it. But I just want to give you a quick reminder that the simple pattern guide should be used as an aid to go along with the tutorial and shouldn't be used by itself without completing the tutorial at least once for best results. You'll notice that there are abbreviations used here, especially for the penguin body. Please use the term and abbreviation guide provided, which is the last page of the PDF, to help you understand the abbreviations. This is my first pattern where I'm using these abbreviations, so it may take some time and practice to get used to, but if at any point you have any questions, please reach out to me using the email that is provided in the PDF. Okay, so I'm first going to start with this light gray. This is going to be the bottom of the baby penguin. Okay, and to start, we are going to leave about 6 to 8 inches of tail yarn, and we're going to create our slip knot up here. So to create our slip knot, we just do a loop and pull up that working yarn through that loop and tighten by pulling on your tail yarn. So here is our first loop. This counts as loop number 1. We are going to chain on a total of 12 loops. So this is loop 1, so we have 11 more to go. Make sure that your loops are about 2 fingers wide, so you can just pull on your working yarn and hold at the knot to make your starting loop a little bit smaller. Okay, so go ahead and pull up 11 more loops. That's 2, 3, 4. Again, make sure that your loops are all about the same size as you pull up your loops. Okay, and then you can go back and count if you lose count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, so now that I have my 12 loops chained on, I'm going to create a circle. If you've never done any of my tutorials before and you find that I do my circle and my second row a little bit different than you do, you can either try to follow along with what I am doing, or you can just go ahead and do what you normally do when you're creating your circle and second row. That will be completely fine as well. So if you're not comfortable with trying to follow along with what I'm doing and you're just more comfortable with doing what you're used to doing, you can definitely go ahead and do that. So I'm going to use my tail yarn and I'm going to put that through my last loop, and I'm going to pull until I hit that slip knot. Okay, so now that I have my tail yarn and my working yarn pointing away from me, I'm going to go around in a clockwise direction, pulling up loops through these next loops. So here's my working yarn. I am going to go one loop over, so this is the loop that my working yarn is pulled through. I'm going to go one loop over and pull up a loop. Again, making sure that your loops are about 2 fingers wide. And then again, I'm going to go over to the next one and keep pulling up loops. Now, as you're pulling up loops, if you've done my tutorials before, you know that your circle is going to be flipping inside out as you go around. So just keep going around until you hit that slip knot and right where your tail yarn is. Alright, so I pulled up my last loop before the slip knot. The slip knot is right here. I can't pull a loop up through the slip knot, so I'm going to go one over, which is where the tail yarn is pulled through, and I'm going to pull up a loop through there. But before I do that, I'm going to take my tail yarn and poke it through the top of the circle so it then is facing down. So pull it through and out through the bottom, and now the tail is pointing down. So I'm going to take my working yarn and go through that loop, and then I'm going to take my tail yarn and the last loop I pulled up and just straighten them out. Okay, and then my last loop, loop number 12, is facing inwards rather than side to side like the rest of them were, so I'm just going to put my finger through that last loop and I'm just going to twist it so it is in line with how the rest of them were. I'm going to take my working yarn and pull up that loop. Okay, so you can go ahead and count your loops to make sure that you have 12 total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Alright, so we have our second row done. The first row, our chain row, counted as row 1, and then we just completed our second row. So now we are going to move on to the next row, row number 3, and we are going to do 7 rows total of this gray yarn. Okay, so we're just going to continue on with the next loop and pull up another loop, and we're just going to keep going around. And then on the next completed row, I'm going to show you how I count backwards in case you lose count of how many rows you're at. Okay, so I am lined up back with that tail yarn here, going down, and then I go one over from where the tail yarn is, and that's how I know that I've completed a row. If you're used to using stitch markers, you can of course use stitch markers as well to keep track of your rows. And then to count how many rows you're at, I just count backwards, so I go 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to just continue going on until I hit 7 rows total. Now feel free to pause this video if you need to catch up, or you can also fast forward if I am going too slow for you. Everyone learns at a different pace, so feel free to go with whatever pace that you're comfortable with by pausing or rewinding or speeding up the video. So I'm just keeping my loops the same size as I continue to knit around and around in a circle until I hit 7 rows. This is the easiest part of the penguin, is just creating the bottom part. It's going to get a little bit more, you'll notice a little bit more of the intermediate level skills that will come into place once we get to the face of the penguin. Alright, so I am going to count how many I'm at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have one more row to go before I complete my 7 rows. Okay, and almost there. Right, so I'm lined up with the tail now, so I know that I have to go one over to complete my row. Alright, so I'm at 7 rows, and now we are going to switch to the next color, which is going to be our black. Okay, so here is my black. Now at this point, if you're someone who uses the lighter method, you can go ahead and use the lighter method for this, for attaching the black and the gray here. And then in just a minute, we'll be attaching the white yarn. For the white yarn, I definitely recommend using the knot method, but if you would like to do the lighter method for this, if you're used to doing that and you've done it before, you can definitely go ahead and attach the black with the gray now. But for the sake of this video, I am going to just use the knot method. So I am just going to tie a knot right at the bottom or at the base of this loop here. So it's going to be right behind this last loop that we made. So that's my first one. I'm just going to pull this black down so it's nice and snug behind this last loop, and then do that second one to create that double knot. I'm going to pull my black and my gray here to tighten it, but then I'm also going to take my black and hold this loop and pull the other way too to make sure that the knot is nice and secure. So then at this point I'm going to take off this excess black yarn here, but I'm not going to go too close to the knot to account for any slippage that might happen. So you'll see there's a little bit of black here that I'm going to leave there, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the gray, not cutting too close to the knot, just leaving a little bit of extra. Okay, so at this point we are all done with the gray for the body. We'll come back to the gray for the arms of the penguin, but now we are just going to pick up with the black. Okay, so now we're going to grab our black yarn and we are going to loop on 4 more loops continuing on. So just go 1 loop over, pull up a loop. Your knot is going to be kind of at the center here and behind, not in front. Make sure your knot is on the inside of the penguin's body. So that is 1 loop. We're going to do 3 more. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have 4 loops total of the black, and now we are going to already move on to the white. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing we did before with knotting the black onto the gray. We are going to take our white and we are going to knot on the white. So same process as before, tugging my white down so it's nice and snug against this last loop that we did, and then do that double knot, pull it tight, and then I'm going to take my white yarn and pull that tight as well. Okay, so now I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm only going to be cutting this little bit of excess white that I have. I'm going to leave the black attached. So now we are going to be working with both colors. But the first step is to be working with the white yarn now. We are going to leave the black off to the side but still attached to this knot because we are going to go back and work with that in just a minute. So for this one, instead of just going right over to this next loop here, I am going to go in between this last loop that we did with the black and this loop, and I am going to find the next row down, and I'm going to pull up my white yarn, pull up a loop right through there. So we're creating a new loop, but now we are quickly going to get rid of that extra loop. So we are going to put our finger through the gray loop, the next one over from that white loop that we just pulled up, And instead of grabbing that white yarn, the working yarn, I'm going to grab this white loop that we just created. So go ahead and pull up that white loop. So we are now getting rid of that one gray loop. So this is basically just to help keep the knot on the inside of the penguin. So when you go to put the fin on, I've noticed when I don't do that, that this knot will tend to pop out if I don't do that extra step. Okay, so I have my first white loop on, and now I am going to continue on with my white yarn, and I'm going to pull up 4 more loops, continuing on the row. Okay, so I have 5 loops total of my white yarn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now that I have all 5 loops on, I'm going to go back to the black yarn. So instead of continuing on this way, we're going to flip this around back to where my black pieces are. I'm going to pick up with my black yarn, and I'm just going to go in the opposite direction that we have been going, and I'm going to pick up a new loop through that first black loop that we created, and we're going to go all the way around the penguin until we hit that white yarn again, or that last white loop that we created. So I'm just using my opposite hand now to pull up loops. So here is the knot that we created to attach the black yarn. We are just going to go right over top of that and just go right up with this next gray loop. Just going to continue on, and now we are back to that first white loop, or that last white loop that we created. So here is what we are looking at. We have our black we have our black yarn, and we have our white yarn right next to each other. Okay, so at this point we're going to pick up with the white yarn and continue on going this way with our white loops. But to do that, we're not going to just pick up the white yarn right away. We are going to crisscross our black and white like so, so it's creating an X. Anytime we are going to do a crisscross, you want to make sure that the color you are going to work with next is at the bottom of the cross. So we're going to be using our white next because we just finished with our black loops. So we want to make sure that our white yarn is at the bottom of the crisscross because we're going to pull it over top that black piece, like so. And we are going to pull it tight so they're next to each other. And then we are going to pick up with our white yarn. So we're going to push our black down, and we are going to just cross over that white yarn so it's ready to be used to pick up a new loop. And we're just going to leave our black where it is. So we are going to continue going with our white yarn and just follow those white loops. Okay, so one more white loop to go through. And then the next one is our black, so we are going to continue with our black yarn, but you'll see that our white yarn is over here and our black yarn is over on the opposite side. So we are going to turn our work. So we are now back with our black yarn and where our working black yarn is. I am going to go this way, pulling our black yarn up, so we are going in the direction that the black loops are. So take your black working yarn and just pull up loops like normal until again you will hit the white loops. So just go all the way around, matching the black with the black until you hit the white. Okay, so we are with our white again. Here are our 2 strands of yarn. We have our white and our black. We are going to do the same thing again where we crisscross to change the colors we are working with. So we just finished with the black, and we're going to pick up with the white again. We're going to start with the white. So again, the white has to go on the bottom of the X, and the black, because we just finished working with the black, is going to go on top. So pull it snug and close so the loops are close together, and then cross it over again. So we are going to pick up with the white. Okay, so go ahead and do 2 loops of white, and then this is where it's going to be a little bit different. So this is where we're going to bring the black in. So do 2 loops of white, and then pick up with your black yarn, and you're going to do that 3rd loop. You're going to do it black. So go ahead and cross over your black yarn, and your white is going to stay underneath that black yarn. And go ahead and pull up a loop, and you want that slack, that extra piece of yarn of black, right behind those 2 white loops that you just did. You don't want to pull it too tight, because we want these 2 loops to stay nice and flat and even. If you pull it too tight, then these loops are going to start being smushed kind of like this, and we definitely don't want that. So make sure that your yarn is nice and kind of flush or straight behind these 2 pieces, these 2 white loops, and it's not pulled too hard. Okay, so we have our 1 black loop up, and now we're going to continue with the white to do these 2 white pieces. So go ahead and grab your white yarn and then pull it over top your black piece of yarn. So pull up a loop, and again the same thing, make sure you're leaving that straight piece of yarn that is behind this black loop, and make sure that you're not pulling it too tight. Okay, so there is another white loop, and we're going to go 1 more to complete that row. So this is what it's looking like so far. We have 3 rows. We have 3 rows of white, but on that 3rd row we added that black loop in the middle. I'm going to take my black yarn, which is still attached to this loop here, and we are going to pick up by going to our next black loop over. So the black yarn is now going to be over top this white yarn, and go ahead and just pull up that next loop. And again, you have your black yarn that is right behind these next 2 white loops, and we're not pulling it too tight, we're leaving that slack there. So go ahead now and just continue to pull up your loops like normal until you hit your white row or your white loops. Okay, so I have 1 more black loop to pull up, and now I'm back at my white. So at this point my black and my white are on opposite sides again. So I just finished with the black yarn. I'm going to turn my work, so I am with my white yarn here, and I'm just going to take this yarn, and I'm just going to pull up loops, these 2 loops here. 1, 2, and now I've hit where that black loop is. So instead of continuing on with that white yarn, I'm going to bring my black yarn over, and I'm just going to pull up another loop with my black yarn, and I'm just leaving these 2 loops here for now because I will cross this over later. So again, pull up that black loop here, and it's hard to see now because it's black on black, but here is my stripe or my straight piece of yarn that is just right behind these 2 white loops. So we're going to leave that there, we're going to leave that slack there. We're going to leave our black piece of yarn right where this last loop we pulled up. We're going to leave that right there. We're going to pick up with our white yarn, going over top the black yarn, and just put your white yarn right behind that last black loop that we did and just go ahead and pull up your next 2 white loops. So this is where we're at. We finished row 4 of the face, so we did 2 rows of just white, and then we did 2 rows of white with the black, 2 black loops in the middle. Okay, so at this point we've got our white yarn on this side. We still have our working black yarn right at the center of the penguin's face. We are going to take our black yarn. We are going to continue on with the black yarn, but instead of going straight into this next loop over, we are going to, again, what we did before, we are going to go right in between these 2 loops, 1 row down, and we are going to pull up another loop, creating another loop through that one. So we've created another loop, and now we are going to go, again like we did before, I'm going to go 1 loop over, and instead of grabbing with this black working yarn, I'm going to grab this loop here, the one that we just created, and I'm going to pull that one through there to close this gap up a little bit better than it would be closed up with just pulling up 1 more regular loop. So again, I made sure that I created plenty of slack. I left this piece of yarn here. And don't worry, all of these pieces of yarn are going to be secured by putting the eyes in, so we'll do that in a little bit. But I'm just going to continue on. I made that first loop here, and then we're just going to continue on pulling up loops like normal with the black until we hit our white loops again. Okay, so here we are. We have our white and black yarn together again, so that means we need to do a crisscross. I need to pick up with the white again, so I know that my white yarn needs to go on the bottom of the crisscross or the X, and then I'm just going to pull them snug and then continue on with my white piece of yarn. So I'm going to do this a little bit different this time. I'm going to pull up 1. Okay, so we've pulled up our 1 loop for the white, and instead of going through and pulling up another loop like we have been with this next loop, we're going to decrease. So we are going to go ahead and take this last loop that we pulled up, and we are going to pull it through this next loop over. So with my pointer finger, instead of grabbing onto the working yarn, I'm going to do the same thing, like kind of like we've done before, and just pull that last loop that we did through. So now we're just left with this 1 white loop on the left side of the penguin's face. And now we're going to pick up with our black yarn, and we're going to pull it over top this white yarn here, and we are going to just pull up another loop to create another black loop with that same black row that we've been working with. Now pick up with your white yarn again. Make sure it's on top of your black yarn here, over top and right behind that last loop that we created, and pull up your next white loop. And then same thing with here, we're going to decrease, so we're going to put our pointer finger through that next loop over. Instead of picking up with our white working yarn, we are going to pull this loop through that next loop. Okay, so we are left with these 3 loops. We started with 5 and now we're down to 3 loops with the face of the penguin. Okay, so at this point we're just going to leave our white alone. We're going to pick back up with our black piece of yarn here, go through that next black loop and pull up a loop. At this point the slack here, or the pieces of yarn, are going to be a little bit tighter. They're not going to be as big because we decreased 1. So go ahead and make sure to pull it a little bit closer than you have been when adding another loop. So just continue on with your black. Okay, so now we are at the point where we have our one white loop left. We are just going to continue with our black. So you're going to take your last white loop on the left side and you're just going to pull up a black loop with the black yarn through that one. And then here we are again with our black row in the middle, pull up with black, and we're just going to continue working with the black now. So we're all done with the white. Pull up again a black piece of yarn. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I am going to cut this white yarn about 3 inches here. And we are done working with the white. I'm going to put the white off to the side now. But we need to make sure to secure this piece of white yarn. So right at this point I am going to just tie a triple knot to make sure it's extra secure and tie it right behind this loop here. So don't pull it too tight to where this loop is coming out, just pull it tight enough to where it's right behind that last white loop. And then on that third knot, I'm going to make sure that I am taking my white yarn and I'm putting it behind the black yarn and pulling the loop through that way. So I'm going over top and then down through and then tighten it. That way that my white piece of yarn is pointing towards the inside of my penguin and not towards the outside of the penguin. Because if it's pointing towards the outside, there's more of a chance that this little knot or the excess that I'm going to leave on, that this little white part is going to pop out. Okay, so now I'm going to continue on with my black yarn, and we are going to do 3 rows total of this we're going to do 3 rows total of this black yarn. We've already completed one. We're on our second row now, and you can just count that by looking at the white on the penguin. So here's my last loop of the white. It's hard to see the black yarn on camera, but there are 2 rows above this last white loop. So that's how we know that we are on our second row, and I'm going to complete 1 more row to have 3 rows above that white to finish. Okay, so I'm going above the face now. I've completed 3 rows above the face. 1, 2, 3. Once I'm at the point where I'm lined up with the white on the right side of the penguin, I know that I have 3 more loops to go to complete it. So 1, 2, 3. And I know that I've completed a row by again going back to where the tail is. If you go straight down, I've lined up with the tail, and then I go 1 over to complete the row. So at this point you can go ahead and cut the black off. I'm going to leave about 8 inches of yarn. I'm going to just take off the excess, throw that off to the side, and we have completed the body of the penguin. So now we're going to move on to putting in the eyes and the beak of the penguin. Okay, so to create the eyes, we're going to take our black yarn and we are going to do about 6 inches or so of yarn. We're going to do 2 pieces of that. I'm just going to take off this extra fluff here. And then with these 2 pieces of yarn, I'm just going to create a knot right in the center of the pieces of yarn. So there's my first knot, and here is my second knot. Okay, so we've got our eyes done, and then we are going to take our mustard yellow, or whatever yellow color you want to use. We're going to leave about 4 inches or so, 4 to 5 inches of tail yarn, and we're going to create a slip knot up here. So go ahead and create that slip knot. Again, about 2 fingers wide. And then go ahead and pull up just 1 loop through that. So you're doing a chain of 2. And then you're going to take what's left over, or you can cut your yarn, and then pull that loop through the bottom and up through that last loop we created, and then tighten it. So there is your beak. So you have your 2 strands of yarn on either side, and that's going to go through the center. So first thing I'm going to do is place the eyes. Alright, so I put my finger through where I want the first strand of yarn to go through. So this is 1, 2, 3rd row of the white down, and I'm going to place my first strand of yarn through, and then I'm just going to pull it on through the back side until it hits the knot that we made. And then I'm going to go 1 above it, so I'm going to put my finger right where it needs to be, and that is 1, 2. Right on the 2nd row down of the white, I'm going to take my other side and poke that through, and I'm just going to pull it all the way down. Okay, so here is my first eye, and then sometimes when I do this eye, sometimes this white yarn is like kind of tucked in there, so it kind of looks like this black row is right next to this eye. So if that happens to you, just go ahead and pull up that white next to it and it will pop out. So at this point I'm going to put my second eye in to make sure that this is symmetrical on both sides before I tie them in the back. And then same thing here, I am going to go 1, 2, 3rd row down on that white, put the one side in and slide it until it hits the eye or the knot, and then go up 1, 1, 2. Put my finger through there and then just slide it down. So this is kind of what I was talking about, where the white isn't really showing on this eye. So I'm just going to go in there and pick up that white so that way that there is that separation. So I'm going to take a look at my penguin's eyes to make sure that they are level or symmetrical. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a triple knot with the 2 strands that I placed on either side. I tie those 2 together, and then those 2 pieces of strand should be wrapping around those slack pieces that we had put in before. So go ahead and do a triple knot. And your eyes will sink in a little bit as you do this, but you'll be able to pop them back out, especially when we put that polyfill in. And then now I'm going to just do a triple knot for this eye as well. And then just make sure that you're grabbing the 2 pieces of yarn that are attached to the one eye. Make sure you're not accidentally grabbing any other strands in there. Okay, so there are my eyes, and then I'm going to take my beak, and then you can go ahead and kind of just go like this, and then decide which side looks more like a beak. So for me that is this side, so I'm going to place the beak on this way. So I am going to place the beak right here. So it's right below where the black starts, right on either side of where the black starts. So I'm going to poke the one side in, slide it until it reaches the one side of the beak, and then the same thing. Okay, and then I'm just going to take a look at it, straighten it out to make sure everything looks good before I tie it. And then again, I'm just going to do a triple knot. Okay, and last knot. Alright, so there is the face of your penguin. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the feet and the fins. So I'm going to take my gray again, and I am going to create that. So I'm going to leave about 6 inches of tail, and I'm going to create a slip knot again, making sure it's about 2 fingers wide, and then I'm going to go ahead and chain on 3 total, so that's 2, and 3. So I have 1, 2, 3 chained on, and instead of continuing on with a 4th chain like normal, I'm going to go down here to my first loop that we did. So this is the last loop we did, here's the middle or the second one, and here is the third one. So I'm going to do it on the right side. I'm going to take my working yarn and pull up a loop through that right side. So I'm left with 2 loops like so. I'm going to take the third loop of my chain and I'm going to pull it over top this last loop that I did. Pull it over top like so, and I'm just going to keep my thumb in that last loop that we did because we are going to cut the gray yarn, leaving again about 6 inches or so, and I'm going to pull it through this loop here, and then we are just going to tighten it. Okay, so there is our first arm or fin, or I'm not sure what it's called on a penguin. And then we're just going to create a second one. So again, slip knot, chain on 3 total, so 2 more. 1, 2. Another way to think of it is to turn it vertically. You have 1 loop, 2, 3. On the third one down, we are going to pull up a loop, and then we're going to take our top loop and pull it, take our top loop and pull it over top that last loop or the bottom loop that we just created. Go ahead and cut your yarn and pull up that loop, or pull that piece of yarn through that last loop, and then tighten it the best you can. Alright, so I'm going to straighten everything out, and there is our second fin. And now we are just going to create our feet, and it's the same process. So I'm going to take my mustard yarn, create that slip knot, and pull up 2 more loops, so 3 total. You can turn it vertically. 1, 2, third one down, pull up a loop on the right side. Take your top loop and pull it over top the last loop that you created. And then go ahead and cut your yarn. Again, I still have my thumb in that last loop I created so I don't lose it. Pull that yarn through and tighten. Whoops! Yarn snapping can happen. That's okay. We can just redo that. If you've been working with chunky yarn for a while, you know that that is just part of working with this chunky yarn, is that sometimes it snaps. Okay, so I got my 3 chained on. I'm going to go down to that bottom one, pull it over top, and then let's go ahead and pull that through, and then hopefully you don't break it this time. Alright, so there is my first foot down. Okay, so I've grabbed some more mustard yarn, and I'm just going to quickly do that last foot, or flipper, or whatever it's called. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to put my feet aside, and I'm going to be working with my fins first, the gray ones. Okay, so there are 2 sides to these. So if you take one side and pull it back, take the other side and pull it back, the one side you'll notice that there is this kind of extra little loop, and then on this side there's not really that extra loop. So you'll see it kind of poke out when you pull it back on either side. So for me, here's this one. This is going to be the back side. and this is going to be the front side. So we're working with the front side. So we're going to put our one strand right above where that knot is. So here is our knot. We are going to put the one strand right in between the gray and the black, right above the knot. Pull that down, and then we are going to go a row over and pull that piece of strand through. Go ahead and pull that down so your fin is in. Okay, so the next step is to just tie one little knot to get it secure in that spot, and then we are going to go right down here, right in the middle of this row. It's going to be 1, 2 gray rows down. Pick up one of the gray strands and pull it back up through that row where my finger just was. And then go ahead and take, this is where that little piece, extra piece of your fin is going to come into play. Take your piece of strand that you pulled up and then wrap it around or through that loop, and then go ahead and pull and push this strand down through the same spot that you pulled it up through. And then go ahead with those two gray pieces of strands on the inside, go ahead and do a double or triple knot to secure it. Okay, so there is my first fin, and we are going to work on the second one. So again, pull your pieces down and look for that extra loop behind it. This is going to be the front. And then this one is a little bit tricky. I found that the best place to put the fin so that they're nice and even is right in between that crisscross that we did, the very first crisscross that we did. It's a little bit hard. This one was easy for me to get my finger through, but it might be a little bit tricky depending on how tight you did it. So you just have to really get your finger in there and try to separate that crisscross that you did. It's going to be right in between the gray and the white and the black. So I'm going to put that first strand through in the middle of that crisscross. Again, it's going to be a little tight. And then I'm going to go just one over right in between that gray and black. And there is my fin in. And I'm just going to make sure that it looks about even. You can go ahead and play around with the placement because everyone finger knits a little bit differently. Their loops are a little bit of a different size. So what works for me might not work on your penguin. So go ahead and play around with it to see what is the best placement for your fins. The idea is just that they are as even as possible and symmetrical. So go ahead and do that first knot, and then go down 2 rows of the gray and pull up one of your gray strands. Go through that loop with your strand that you just pulled up, and then pull on it to tighten it, and then go through that same row that you used to pull it up. And then with your 2 gray strands now back in the back of or the inside of the penguin, go ahead and do a double or triple knot to secure it completely in place. Okay, so there are my fins on the penguin, and then go ahead and grab your feet. We're nearing the end at this point. We just have to put the feet on, close up the top, stuff the bottom, and then close the bottom, and then we are done. So again, we are going to take our one foot. We are going to see which side has that extra loop, and then this is going to be the front again. So the one with the extra loop kind of in the back that sticks up is always going to be on the back side of the penguin. So we are now going to hold our foot this way instead of down. If you follow that split straight down, you are going to go one over, and you're going to go, both strands are going to go in between this row here. And then on this side, if you go straight up, that is where the eye is. So if you go straight down from where the eye is, you're going to put one strand here, and then if you go one straight down from where the split of the white and black are, it's going to be one over. And it's going to go in between. Your two pieces of strand are going to go in between this row. And then for how high to do it, so this right here is my first row, here is the second one, you are going to go right there. So put your two pieces of strands on either side of that one row. And I'm just going to leave it just like that, and I'm going to insert the other one, again making sure that that extra piece is on the back side. I feel like it's a little bit easier to see on this side of the penguin, so again here is the split, go straight down and then go one over, find the eye, go straight down, and it is directly right where the eye is straight down. So again, you are going to go 2 rows up, 1, 2, and that is going to be the placement of your feet. Put those 2 strands in. Okay, so there are your feet. Make sure that they're lined up nicely, and then go ahead and grab the 2 strands that are attached to this one and just do 1 knot, close it, and then come over here and do just 1 knot. Okay, and then we are going to take the strands for just this foot, and I am going to poke a strand up on the right side of this foot, and I'm going to go up to 1, 2, and poke it up again on the right side, lined up with where we put that strand on the right side. Okay, go ahead and pull this yarn through that extra loop on the back side, and then you're also going to take it from this top loop here, and also you're going to put that through, and then you are going to tighten it and then pull this loop right through that same loop that you pulled it up. Pull it down and then do a double or triple knot now with those 2 pieces of yellow. Okay, so there's my first one, and now we are going to do the second one. So I already did the 1 knot behind this foot. I'm going to find the placement that I need to poke up the 1 strand of yarn. So it's 1, 2 above, and this one is going to be on the left side. Pull up that strand, find that extra loop on the back side, pull it through, and then you're also going to pull it through that top loop as well, and pull it down. I'm going to push that yarn through that same spot that we pulled it up in. Push it down and then do a double or triple knot to secure it completely. So here's how the baby penguin is looking, and now we are just going to close up the top before stuffing it. I'm going to take what's left of my working yarn, and I'm going to go in a counterclockwise direction, and I'm going to push my yarn starting from the inside towards the outside through that next loop over. And I'm just going to go ahead all the way around, tightening it about halfway through. And then to tighten it, I like to just put my thumb, the last loop that will close up, so that way it doesn't slip out. And then go ahead and just finish closing it up. And then I tighten it once more before going through that last loop. Okay, top is closed, and now I just do a double knot right at the base of the yarn. Find the center that I just closed up and push the yarn all the way through. And there we go, the top is closed up, and now we're just going to grab some polyfill, and we are going to stuff the penguin from the bottom. Go ahead and make sure that the polyfill gets all the way up to the head. And you can shape the penguin as you do this as well. Okay. I like to put a good amount of polyfill in my stuffies to make sure that they're nice and firm, but you also don't want to overfill it as well so that gaps start to show. So it's kind of a balance of polyfill. Okay, so I've got my polyfill in, and now I'm going to close up the bottom. So this time I'm working in a clockwise direction. I'm going to grab that first loop over, and this time I'm working going from the outside towards the inside when I'm pulling that loop in. And this time I tighten every single loop as I go. Oops. And you're just going to go around and around until you get to that last loop. And we are so close to finishing this baby penguin. Here's your reminder that if you need help at any point, you can always send me an email and ask me your questions. An intermediate level pattern, so if you found that this was a little bit challenging, just a reminder that it is an intermediate level pattern, so it might take some time and practice before you get this pattern down perfectly. So keep trying, and of course if you need any help, just send me an email and I'm happy to help you. Alright, so I pushed that knot down, and here is your penguin. So you can go ahead and shape your penguin to get it looking just right. If the head's a little flat, you can just go ahead and push everything into place to how it needs to be. So here is your baby penguin. So this one is my favorite stuffy to make. I have so much fun making it, and I hope you enjoyed making it as well. This one, of course, is a little bit more challenging than any of my other stuffy tutorials that I have out. So if you need help at any point, don't forget that you can always rewind and practice each step until you get it down. But if you need any help beyond that, please send me an email and I'm happy to help you along the way. So feel free to send me the penguins that you created with this tutorial my way. I would love to see it, and I'd love to share them on my Instagram stories as well. Thanks so much for watching!